Our next speaker, Dr. David Towlson, trained as a physical chemist, worked in industrial research and development, and then moved into health and safety management and training. Dr. Towlson is Principal External Examiner for NEBOSH, the National Examination Board for Occupational Safety and Health in the United Kingdom. Dr. Towlson is also Director of Quality and Training for RRC International. As a chartered member of the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health, please welcome Dr. David Towlson.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. You can all hear me. I've never had quite so many photographers since I was married. You know, it's one of those things, isn't it? Yes, I am married. There was a woman who actually agreed to that at some stage. I'm going to talk to you today. Well, the title says it all, really. It's quite complex. But, you know, hey, I'll kind of like make it more simple. I'm going to be honest with you here. I've had my fair share of accidents over the years. I started collecting them, it seems, when I was very young, in some misguided attempt to hide the damage that I'd caused in the house when I was a small boy. I decided to pick up a broken glass vase. And as a result, I still bear the scars today. There was a very nice man at the hospital who managed to sew it up, so that was good. Then when I was a teenager, because there were more liberal times there, I used to make my own fireworks. And again, I have a scar over my eye for that as well. All of these are exciting things. However, it's not stopped there. I've also managed to set fire to my garage whilst welding. Because I failed to take all the grease off the article I was dealing with. I've also had the house was struck by lightning. So again, when anybody says to me, you've got as much chance of that happening as being struck by lightning, it kind of rings true. And I've also dropped my motorcycle more times than I care to mention. Sometimes I've managed to wedge my leg in between the motorcycle and the ground, which causes pain but stops the damage to the bike. The bike weighs about 230 kilos, so it's very difficult to lift. So I've had my fair share of accidents, and I think what it's taught me is there's a certain amount of randomness about accidents. You can't predict when an accident's going to happen to a specific individual. However, there's a certain amount of predictability in accident trends as well. You can sort of almost predict every year that there will be so many traffic accidents. You can't say who will be involved in those traffic accidents, but you know, you can say how many they are frequently. So accidents are complicated, but frequently they involve, to a certain degree, people, and they are in kind of often the cause of some accidents as well. Not all of them by any means. It's actually complicated, but there is a human element to them, whether it's indirectly through the design of a process, poor design, whether it's actually the fact that people don't know what to do, that people don't know how to react, don't understand the process. But these things often involve people, obviously. The most dangerous situation is where somebody who really is certain about what they want to do, but is actually wrong, very wrong. And they're very dangerous people, and they need to be taken out of the equation. So what I'm trying to say here is that when people are involved, knowing what to do, that is the competence, actually being able to do the job properly, is a primary concern, especially as things become more and more complex. And that's kind of not just a matter of education, but clearly it's the experience that they have as well, and their attitudes as well. As we've heard earlier on, people's attitudes to wanting to sort things out as well is very important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about competence. But going back to accidents affect a great deal of things at very different levels. I mean, I've got here that they affect you. Clearly they affect me as well. I've recounted a number of accidents that affected me. I guess everyone's had an accident here at some stage. But they also affect families, the people that you kind of love, your sons, brothers, daughters, things like that. When it hits home, when it actually affects you, that's when it happens. It affects your colleagues as well, people that you work with. And it affects businesses. I mean, as we'll hear later on as well, there are specific incidences like the Deepwater Horizon incident in the Gulf of Mexico that affected BP. We'll hear later on Hassan talking about the BP Texas City oil refinery accident. We see as well that it affects communities. So Bhopal in India is still suffering many, many years after the event, with hundreds of thousands of people affected. Seveso in Italy as well, toxic substance release. Many years later, people are suffering the effects of that. And society as a whole as well. Not only things like the hospitals have to cope with, not just major accidents, but repeated small incidents as well. It has a burden on the system. But also people's tolerance. When you have a major accident, what happens is people become intolerant of it. People become risk averse. People actually think, no, it's not going to happen in my back garden. No one wants to live next to a nuclear reactor these days for some reason. I don't mind it, to be honest. I mean, I think it might be quite groovy to go around a nuclear reactor, all except Fukushima, of course. But at the end of the day, these things are often reactions against poorly managed situations. And when they're actually well managed, people still react against them. And what it ends up doing is creating laws, creating sometimes ill-conceived laws to manage things and to kind of like play to people's reactions. Now, sometimes these are very good laws, but it has this impact on society as a whole. It's the cumulative thing. So clearly accidents have to be managed at some point, otherwise accidents will continue to happen. But managing risk, it can be quite a complex situation. Now risk, I like the definition of risk in ISO 31000. It says that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And I like that because the effect of uncertainty can be positive or negative, and that means that health and safety can present not only threats to your organisation, but also great opportunities. And in reality, you do not want to eliminate all risks. If we eliminated all risks, we wouldn't be working in oil and gas. We wouldn't be working in construction. Society would be poorer as a result. If we didn't have oil and gas, we wouldn't have many of the pharmaceuticals, the plastics. In fact, to a certain extent, it's a bit of a waste to burn oil and gas products because they are so useful for creating chemicals, plastics, things like that, make our everyday life more interesting. I wouldn't say necessarily better, but certainly more interesting. So there are certain risks that we need to take and need to benefit from because society benefits from them as a result. And also, if you manage things properly, then it does give you that competitive edge. The reality is, if you manage stuff really well, you can work in areas of risks that other people cannot because they don't manage them so well. The risks are intolerable to them. Whereas if you manage them well, then they are at least acceptable, if not tolerable as well. So it's actually very good for business and good for society. It's a poor thing if children don't take risk, if they live in a kind of a cotton wool society. So risk can be a very good thing at the end of the day. There are other drivers as well. I mean, clearly wanting to do the right thing, the moral obligation, the moral argument, we heard that earlier on. But there's a legal expectation. I'll talk a little bit later on, and other speakers will do that as well. We have the things like, we've got Kuwaiti law, we've got GCC laws, we've got International Labour Organization standards and treaties. Again, I'll look at those later. But you might have contractual obligations as well. As part of a contract that you're doing, there might be expectations of your customers, of your suppliers, that you behave in a particular way with health and safety. But you might also have a formal or informal safety management system installed in your organisation. So that's a kind of an internal driver, not only the kind of moral expectation. So I said I was going to talk a little bit about the International Labour organisation. It has nothing to do with kind of pregnancy or anything, although that you might get that from the title. But it's to do with kind of social. International Labour Organization is a United Nations agency, but it's a kind of a strange one. It was formed many, many years ago, and it has a tripartite organisation. So it represents not only governments, but also represents workers and employers as well. So it's kind of like a union almost, kind of brings together lots of people. And it kind of creates, and not everyone who's a member of the UN, by the way, is also a member of the International Labour Organization. So it creates kind of social, it's got a social labour focus on rights of workers and so on. And it has kind of several layers of kind of internal guides and almost legislation. And one of the fundamental ones is called conventions. And they're kind of like treaties, very high level expectations. And they're in several different layers within that as well. So you've got kind of ones on fundamental rights, and there are kind of 8 of those on workers' rights to association, things like that. Then there are 4 which are called priority conventions, and they relate to things that's the working of the labour system, like enforcement and so on. Things that if you didn't have that, none of the rest would work properly. And then there are a whole load of technical ones, and that's where health and safety fits in, as well as things like worker hours and all of that, worker benefits. It's got a lot of health and safety ones. Some of them very specific, like on asbestos, construction, and there's also very general ones on health and safety. And the Health and Safety Convention will look at that in a little while. But it's also supported by recommendations. Now, whilst the conventions can be ratified, that's the process whereby a government, a state, actually puts those conventions before the lawmaking part of the country, like Parliament, say, and it gets enshrined in local law, and then it becomes legally binding. The recommendations are not legally binding. They're kind of like extra kind of layer of detail on top of the convention, so they help a great deal. And so far, I believe, certainly this year, Kuwait has ratified about 19 conventions. So 19 of those conventions have been enshrined in your local laws. This is kind of like a snapshot of some parts of the Health and Safety Convention from the ILO. And it's kind of fairly obvious stuff that no one would really disagree with. Basically, there are expectations that employers should provide a safe workplace, including all the kind of stuff that goes with that, like machinery, making sure that the chemicals you provide are reasonably safe, although of course that goes back to the suppliers too, but the selection of it. This kind of reasonably safe, so far as reasonably practicable, because everything cannot be absolutely safe and without risk, is making sure that it's kind of reasonably safe. So there's a whole load of things, including agents in the workplace like noise and vibration sources, but also enforcing the use of personal protective equipment as a kind of a last layer of defense. But it doesn't stop there. It's also got responsibilities of employees too, like not misusing safety devices, not interfering with safety devices, and kind of cooperating with the employer. So again, it's a kind of a cooperative work. It's not all on the employer, it's also on the employee. This is the recommendation, the extra layer of detail. And you notice it tries to pad out what that means in practice. So it includes things like providing instruction, training, and supervision for workers. Clearly, the level of supervision depends on the level of competence. So you'd supervise new employees and inexperienced employees far more than employees who know what they're doing a lot more. But this idea of training and education in the workplace is a competence thing. Health and safety, right, that's just the safety management system, all the bits that go with that, risk assessments. And crucially, staying up to date with knowledge. So that kind of stuff that you did 55 years ago, don't expect it to be up to date. Things change, things move on. That's life. That's what you've got to kind of get with the program, as it were. Obviously, in Kuwait as well, you have local laws, as well as through the Gulf Cooperation Council countries regionally as well. And I think my colleague is going to be talking on some of those later on. But fundamentally, you're an economy in Kuwait which is driven by oil and gas and construction. There are a few other industries in there as well, but clearly it's pretty obvious that there's a major oil and gas investment here and exploration. And you've got regulators here. Now, the extent to which they enforce laws and the sector-specific legislation. Again, a colleague will be looking at that a little bit later, so I won't kind of dwell on that. So going back to managing risk. Now, this is, again, is a categorization. The problem with categorizing things is things don't fit neatly into categories, but this is a well-worn and tried and tested categorization. When you're managing risks, which opportunities as well as threats, usually you divide them into technical, procedures, and behavior categories. So by technical, I mean things like guarding, machinery, things like that, things that you can design in from the off, ergonomic design, and so on. Procedures, that's kind of getting the sequence right. Safe operating procedures, permit to work, job hazard analysis, things like that to get the right things organized. And behavior is actually getting people to follow those procedures, but also wear PPE to understand what's going on. And that's kind of a critical area, behavior. I think in many countries, you've kind of nailed the technical side. You've got equipment in place, you've got alarm systems, you've got process controls in there that are probably not quite as good as they could be, but they're certainly pretty high up there. And the area that many people are looking at now is getting the right behaviors in there, getting people to understand the process and how things work out, especially in complex processes like oil and gas processing. So competence, this idea of experience, education, attitude, behaviors, all coming together, matters a great deal. And I've kind of chucked a few ideas down about why it matters. It's pretty obvious to many people why it matters, but having said that, many people still remain uneducated on these issues. As processes become more and more complex, it becomes very difficult to realize the consequences of your actions. In some cases in history, it would have been better for people not to interfere with an incident as it started happening, and actually leave it to its natural course. And the ultimate consequences sometimes would have been less severe had somebody tried to interfere with it with a little bit of knowledge and ends up changing a few things and making the whole thing worse. Also, if you understand your processes and understand how little things can have big consequences, like failure to manage change properly, failure to maintain things, if you leave things long enough, they fall to pieces. Will enable you ultimately to identify potential risks if you understand how these things fit together, these knock-on effects. I mean, this is a kind of an area like HAZOPs, for example, hazard operability studies, where they start to look at collection things, what can happen, what if, and so on. And that's kind of, if you understand the process, you can see that. And crucially as well, identify root causes, why things have happened in the first place, not just messing around the edges, trying to look at symptoms, but actually finding out what caused it in the first place, the real cause of it. Was it just poorly designed? And when we fix it again, it's going to happen again. So this is a learning society. Everyone else would call that continuous improvement and learning from incidents in like quality field, but that's what it is. And also implementing real practical controls that will actually have an effect. I kind of come from a chemical background, and it's very annoying when people go on about trying to control paper cuts in the office and minor slips and trips here and there, when actually your plant is not being maintained and it's about to blow up. You need to prioritize. You cannot treat all risks the same. It's all very nice. People in the office, I'm not saying that people in the office aren't important, of course. They know they are. But at the end of the day, you need to prioritize and have practical measures. So again, you can't put in ridiculous controls, very expensive controls for trivial risks. You need to save your money and your effort and your time for the big risks and actually put in the appropriate level of control. So what I'm talking about, practical controls that don't make safety a laughing stock at the end of the day. Keeping up to date, mentioned that already, things move on. So what works today may not work in 10 years' time, may not work next year. Regulations change, environmental laws change, safety laws change as well. We find out new stuff. There's learning from incidents as well. And as well, this thing about being professional, know your limitations. So sometimes, as I was saying earlier on, the dangerous people are the people that believe they are absolutely right but are absolutely wrong. And it can be difficult to identify those people because they collect followers around them because they have such a level of certainty. And sometimes having a bit of kind of self-knowledge here, realizing that you need help, you need expertise from others, or where to find that expertise is interesting. Well, more than interesting, is crucial. So that's where kind of competence and a kind of education can come in, about knowing your limitations. Awarding bodies. Now, awarding bodies aren't the people that come around and give you certificates necessarily, aren't the people that give you a nice prize, but they have a kind of a crucial role in, organisations like NEBOSH, the National Examination Board in Occupational Safety and Health, which I'm sure many of you have heard of from the UK, but are becoming more widely known. They effectively look at international standards of competency, they look at national standards of competency that governments and professional bodies have actually put together and think we need that kind of level of knowledge, that breadth of knowledge for our industry, and they translate that into qualifications. And what I mean by qualifications is a specification for a course, if you like, topics that need to be covered and expectations of what that person should come away with having studied it. And that's often called a syllabus at the end of the day. They help maintain standards as well, because part of that is the assessment, the kind of exams that go with it. And the reality is that, some exams are kind of exams in name only, and people can buy. We've all heard about people buying certificates and PhDs. I didn't get my PhD from there, by the way, but from some kind of like internet site, just based on your experience or whatever, rather than on some rigorous thing. And part of that is because these organisations like NEBOSH actually get regulated. So they're regulated by governments and government organisations. So they make sure that they are doing things to the right standards. They can't just do anything they like. And that means, as a result, that these qualifications are recognised globally, certainly nationally and regionally, and they can be transferred. So when you've got that kind of piece of paper to say that you've achieved that qualification, then it's recognised by other people. You don't have to kind of go through that again. Obviously, things don't stand still, so you have to kind of keep up to date in knowledge. But also, they don't do the training themselves. Awarding bodies don't, like NEBOSH, don't actually do the training themselves. They approve training providers, like RRC, and got Gary there from RRC and myself as well. And they quality assure those as well. So they make sure that the courses that they provide, the training they provide, are up to scratch, and they're actually reproducible, they're consistent, and they're high quality. And in so doing, that helps you comply with international standards and laws in terms of competency. So what have I said? At the end of the day, accidents happen. And accidents will continue to happen. You can't really stop accidents from happening. We've got a natural desire as humans. That's one of our great traits. We've got a natural desire to explore, to find stuff out. And with that comes risk, also opportunities, but also threats. So the challenge here is to manage them properly. But it's like a revelation. As you go along, you don't always understand the risks fully. So part of that is to develop your own understanding. Some of it is learning from incidents, but some of it is just developing your knowledge, your technical knowledge. And that's where kind of education, competency comes in. So awarding bodies can help you to do that by setting clear standards, clear levels, clear expectations, and actually making sure that people achieve those standards, so you can be sure that those people are up to scratch. Thank you. That's all I've got to say. So it's jolly kind of you to invite me, and take the rest of the day off. Well, no, obviously not. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Oh, sorry. I'm doing. Okay. Thank you.